In the last 7 seasons, the Atlanta Falcons have been one of the league's most mediocre teams, not making a playoff appearance since the 2017 season and not posting a winning record since.
Surprise and pain.
It feels like a nightmare.
A city yearning for triumph, now in its first stages of loss.
But yet, they continue to be an enigma. Strange draft moves.
The Atlanta Falcons select Michael Penix.
Misusing offensive talent.
Let the fantasy guys worry about that.
That's a point.
We got to clean some things up.
Yeah.
We can all be better at our spacing. And the targets is the most misunderstood thing in the National Football League. We don't care about the stats. We care about winning.
And of course, becoming public enemy number 1 with the Shedeur Sanders prank call.
Hey, is this Shedeur? Hey, this is Mickey Loomis here, the GM of the New Orleans Saints.
The bottom line is that this is a franchise who can never capitalize on the good hands they are dealt and have a track record of letting their fans down. This is why the Atlanta Falcons are such a mess. For starters, let's talk about the Falcons' first-round behavior in the last 5 seasons. In the 3 years between 2021 and 2023, the Falcons opted to use top 10 picks on offensive skill positions, drafting tight end Kyle Pitts, wide receiver Drake London, and running back Bijan Robinson. Having sunk this amount of draft capital into 3 exciting young prospects, including the highest draft pick ever for a tight end, you might reasonably expect the Falcons to build a real juggernaut offense. However, that didn't happen due to 2 major shortcomings. Firstly, the team failed to adequately replace longtime franchise quarterback Matt Ryan. Ryan is the greatest quarterback in franchise history by some distance, but by 2021, he was beginning to show signs of decline, with just 20 passing touchdowns and fewer than 4,000 yards for the first time in over a decade. As a result, they traded him to the Indianapolis Colts for a 3rd rounder, which was not a bad move in and of itself. However, the 2022 draft was not a quarterback-heavy one, and ultimately, they settled for Desmond Ridder with the 74th overall selection out of Cincinnati. As a bridge quarterback, Atlanta went for veteran Marcus Mariota, who hadn't held a starting job in nearly 3 seasons since being benched for Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. Starting Mariota under center was an unsuccessful endeavor in 2022, with the team registering the league's 2nd worst passing offense and Mariota being released at the end of the year. The following year, the team decided it was Ridder's turn to start at quarterback. Things weren't any better with him and Taylor Heineke combining for just 17 passing touchdowns on the year, one of the league's lowest figures, as the team ranked 7th last in scoring. That would prove to be the end of Ridder in Atlanta, as well as the end of head coach Arthur Smith, who was let go after 3 straight 7-10 seasons. Smith constantly failed to get the best out of Pitts, London, and Robinson, which became a serious point of frustration for Falcons fans. Here was a team with real potential and impressive offensive firepower, but a head coach quarterback duo that were totally unable to unlock this potential. So, in 2024, the Falcons front office opted to splash out in free agency and secure veteran quarterback Kirk Cousins on a bumper deal worth $180 million over 4 years. This was a logical move, as Cousins was probably the best free agent quarterback on the market, and he looked like he could be the man to take this offense to those promised heights. However, critics of the move question the size of the contract for a 35-year-old veteran coming off a serious Achilles injury. But for now, at least, the Falcons had their man, and were free to spend their first-round pick anywhere else on the field and bolster the roster for a shot at the NFC South title and beyond. Instead,
With the 8th pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, the Atlanta Falcons select Michael Penix Jr.
this was a move that stunned fans across the pro football world, as quarterback was quite obviously not a position of need for the team, having just solved that problem in free agency at a hefty price. The other controversial aspect of this selection was that JJ McCarthy and Bo Nix were still on the board, who most analysts had ahead of Penix. The Washington quarterback was also 24 years old, and with Cousins in place, it was assumed that the plan would be for Penix to sit for at least 2 to 3 years, which would have delayed his debut until his age 26 or 27 season. To sum it up, it was a baffling decision, whatever way you looked at it. The 2024 season began with Kirk Cousins a starter. There was no doubt that the Falcons' offense improved. Cousins had his moments early on, but before long, it became clear his lack of mobility following the injury was an issue. A brutal 4-game stretch with 0 touchdowns and 8 picks meant the clock was ticking on his time as starter, before inevitably making way for Penix in Week 16, with the team sitting at 8-7. All of a sudden, the Falcons' bizarre selection of Penix looked like a stroke of genius. If you forget about the $160 million deal they had coughed up to get Cousins in the building, that is. Despite the chaos, the team ended the season ranked 6th in total yards, with Bijan Robinson in particular having a breakout campaign with an incredible 1,887 yards from scrimmage, ranking him 4th in the league in that category. But even with a new head coach and 2 new quarterbacks, the Falcons still finished 8-9. Failing to take advantage of a poor NFC South and suffering a 7th straight losing season. At least it was clear that it was the defensive side of the ball that needed attention in free agency and the draft, which leads us to yet another strange draft move. Having secured a great value pickup at 15th overall with linebacker Jalen Walker out of Georgia, the Falcons opted to trade next year's first-round pick to the LA Rams in order to pick up James Pearce Jr., a defensive end out of Tennessee. Much like the Penix pick from last year, Pearce is not a bad selection in isolation, but the decision to make such an aggressive trade again raised many eyebrows across the league. Trading a first-round pick away is a move you would usually associate with a contending team looking for one more piece to put them over the top, or a perennially bad team shooting for a quarterback, of which the Falcons are neither, at least to most people. Perhaps this is merely a sign that they believe they're a James Pearce Jr. addition away from downing other NFC giants and reaching the Super Bowl. On the topic of Penix, there is no way anyone can be confident that he is the guy, which surely means you cannot afford to give up a future first rounder. Who knows where that selection could be given the wide range of possible outcomes, and this team could well need another quarterback this time next year. We just don't know. Atlanta general manager Terry Fontenot has come under heavy criticism since being appointed in 2021, and this draft could well be a fork in the road for his future in Atlanta. Again, James Pearce Jr. may well be a successful defensive end in the NFL, but it's difficult to justify making such a bold trade and giving up what could well be a high draft pick in 2026 in a draft that looks, from the outset, like it could be stronger than this one. Trade value aside, drafting Pearce Jr. at all could well be a risk in and of itself. During his time at Tennessee, Pearce was arrested for speeding and driving on a suspended license, which raised plenty of concerns about his character. Many coaches and scouts had serious issues over Pearce's maturity and whether he would be an issue for locker room chemistry. On top of that, he is an undersized edge defender who can struggle against stronger offensive linemen, of which there will be plenty in the NFL. Is that really worth 2 first-rounders? Even setting aside the questionable draft picks, the Atlanta Falcons made yet more negative headlines. The biggest story of this year's draft by a distance was the dramatic draft day slide of Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders, who slid all the way from a potential top 5 pick to pick number 144, eventually being taken by the Browns in round 5. This was clearly a stressful time for Sanders and his family, which was made substantially worse by the behavior of Jax Ulbrich, the son of Falcons defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich. The 21-year-old came across Sanders' contact number on his dad's team-issued iPad and opted to play a mean-spirited prank on the young QB, claiming to be New Orleans Saints GM Mickey Loomis. Sanders took the call and was told he was going to be drafted by the Saints next, which obviously turned out to be untrue, as pretty much every team continued to pass on the poor young quarterback over and over again. Whilst many fans were amused or fascinated by Sanders' slide down the draft board, most found this prank to be cruel and unfair. Of course, when the investigation found out that the responsible party was the son of the new Falcons DC, this led to the Falcons having to carry out damage control, releasing a statement apologizing to Sanders personally. While Sanders himself brushed off the incident and claimed to be unaffected by it, it's difficult to get away from the fact that this was just another unwanted headline and distraction for a franchise that's had so little to cheer about in recent times. For a new defensive coordinator to have to discuss his own son's off-field behavior 5 months before week 1 is obviously far from ideal, and has led to further hate being directed towards the Falcons organization. This is a team who, of course, have still never fully emerged from the shadow of Super Bowl 51. That night in Houston was supposed to be a crowning moment for one of the league's longest-suffering franchises, but instead became an unmitigated disaster and a defining moment of the team's history. The Falcons did make the playoffs the following season, but after a 15-10 defeat to the Eagles in the divisional round, they have not returned, and their 7 straight seasons without a playoff appearance is the joint longest in the NFC, shared with their division rivals, the Carolina Panthers. This is a team that has spent the last few years in desperate need of a culture change and a significant reset, but has never been bad enough to blow everything up, having frustratingly hovered just below 500 for most of that time. Once again, the Falcons go into the 2025 season with some hope that they could win the NFL's weakest division, but no real ambitions to go any further than that. The jury is still out on head coach Raheem Morris, who so far seems like an improvement on Arthur Smith, but it's still unclear if he's the man to take this team back to relevance anytime soon. Admittedly, he's not been helped by his front office, who have sunk $45 million a year into an aging quarterback who may already be done, leaving the team little room to maneuver in free agency. And for all the talk of this explosive Falcons offense, the Falcons wide receiver room looks pretty thin going into 2025. Beyond Drake London, who had his first 1,000-yard season in the last campaign, there's not a huge amount of talent on that depth chart, with Darnell Mooney and Ray McCloud vying to be wide receiver 2 this fall. However, the biggest question mark of all is still at quarterback. Michael Penix Jr. made 3 starts towards the end of last season, and whilst he certainly showed signs of promise, he is a long way off being a sure thing. On defense, this is a team that struggled throughout last season, giving up the second most touchdowns in the league with 34 and recording the second fewest sacks in the league with just 31. Obviously, the hope is that with the additions of Jalen Walker and James Pearce Jr., this Falcons D should be a lot more dangerous, but it's difficult to say that with any real certainty. Pinning the hopes of the defense going forward on 2 undersized defensive players is certainly a choice, and one that may prove to be an error of judgment on the part of GM Fontenot. This 2025 season really looks like a hinge point in the story of this franchise, which has made precious little progress in the last 7 years. Only time will tell to see if they finally drag themselves out of mediocrity, or if they stay stuck in this rut for several more years to come. But what do you think? Is Michael Penix Jr. the man to take the Falcons back to the playoffs, and should the Falcons have made the trade up to get James Pearce Jr.? Let us know in the comments.